One modifier that exists for 6-channel lights is a barn door. It's a very standard fundamental building block to lighting without gripping at the head and cutting and shaping light. Arguably, this should be the most difficult space for a 6-channel light because we're using diodes that are split up all over a cob, mixed in a bunch of different places, so it's almost as if the lens here is working really hard to try to homogenize those and give you like a really nice stable shadow on the other side. You'd be used to seeing this if you're doing something with a classic Dedo light that has a very small point bright light source and is set at 3200 tungsten, or an HMI that has a really crisp, beautiful shadow. So the first thing I want to show you is this DLWAR. It's the wide-angle lens adapter with rotating barn doors. The reason why I show this is because I think it gives you a fighting chance with a 6-channel light to cut reasonable shadows with a barn door at the head itself without having to introduce more grip gear. So here is what that can look like. What this does is actually, it has another lens that floods the light out even more. So from here, remember I'm in full spot. So this is nearly 45 degrees here at full spot. If I go into full flood, we're getting out into the space where we're at more like 90 degrees or 80 degrees. And it's still beautifully homogeneous, but of course we have less light traveling because we're spreading it even more and we're passing it through another lens. But because we're passing it through another lens, we've got a nice little filter there. And we can actually cut some pretty reasonable lines with rotating barn doors, which I think is really cool. There's another way that you can get even more homogeneous with this stuff by using this optimizing filter, which will come with each one of these lights. We will give you one of these, and I'll show you in places where this can be useful, especially if you want to optimize shadow lines and try to blend, you know, the patterns together a little bit more. But here I think we're actually doing pretty well. You can see that this shadow quality and the structure of the shadow looks like what you would hope the structure of light should look like. It drops off into darkness. And even though it's transitioning between colors where it's blending all of these different diodes, I'm not seeing a ton of fringing going on the outside edge, which is really promising. So I recommend the wide-angle lens adapter in order to have a fighting chance with the 6-channel system here to actually make some reasonable shadows. All right, so that's the DLWAR, all right? Another way to cut a reasonable line is with this little filter. It's a directional beam spreader. And all we're going to do is drop that into the accessory slot, and I'm going to spot the light down here to its 15-degree maximum spot, and now you can see I have this specific, whatever the diameter of that beam is now anamorphic in its shape, and I can just kind of cut a pretty quick line. This is a really nice way to tailor a line out of a light that's difficult to make shadows with. Now, put this light, I'm going to leave it in full spot, okay. A lot of you use your favorite accessories on Dedo lights. It's important to note that anything in the M size for a classic light, a DLED7, a DLED4, all of those accessories work on the color light. You're just going to have a little bit of varying degrees of how you're going to want to control the beam as it hits its subject. So if you're using a DP 1.2 to do gobos, to do iris work, this is going to work wonderfully with a full spectrum setup. There is a couple of little spaces where you'll need to kind of pay attention to just to make sure you're aware of them and prepared, and I'll try and show those to you right now. So I'm going to put in my favorite accessory, the light shield ring. It's the cheapest of the Dedo light accessories and really a wonderful building block on which to use all your other accessories. Now I'm going to take my DP 1.2 projector and I'm going to slide it into the accessory slot, and we're going to take a look at the resolution, which should be perfect. That's what you are hoping to have when you get into the Dedo light system, so it should be perfect. And now what I'm going to do is flood the light out to get it to its most homogeneous place. Beautiful saturation. It's really, really bright and colorful. I'm going to pull it out of focus because a lot of you who use projection systems do that in order to soften edges because you don't want hard edges and you want to blend a little bit. So if I start to do that, we're getting into a space now where you would expect to see more fringing on the outside edges of each one of those little drop-offs. You may see that if you're in a close-up. You may start to see that there's little aberrations or fringing that goes on. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to put this back into 5600 and we're going to take a look at it that way because I think a lot of you will want to see this. If I keep pulling this thing out of focus, you're going to get to a space where you're going to start seeing the fringing. Here, maybe split the difference, right, between full focus, medium focus, and we'll take a look at that again. And this is actually really clean. I'm quite impressed. However, I believe that when you start to pull things out of focus, this edge of your shapes and shadows remains firm. It doesn't drop off into darkness the way that I think it should, the way that I like to show my clients how to do it. So you'll hear me again. I'm beating the drum of something called the DPEYESET, and I want to show that to you now when you're using it with gobos, larger patterns like this. This is in perfect focus, perfect resolution, set at 5600 with the full color light, full spectrum light head. I'm going to take all 3 filters from my DPEYESET and I'm going to stack them, and I'll show you one at a time to give you an idea of what it is that I'm talking about here. So here goes the first one, which is the lightest intensity. And you're going to see that I'm just kind of like disrupting the edges a little bit, but it's also not even because the actual structure of the filter is not even. It's rippled, and some places it's a little flatter than other spaces. So it's kind of built to work with really smaller images. But what I realized was that if I just kept stacking them, and I'm using a gobo, so I'll put on the number 2 and I'll stack it over that, and it's spreading it out even more. The edge is now softer and things are blending a lot more, and there's really no fringing at all. I'm going to add the last one to it and get to a place where I feel like most of you will want to get your breakup patterns kind of looking like this more. Really beautiful, soft, cloudy almost. And the actual edges of the image are falling off into darkness. There is an actual gradation of color. There's no straight lines and no straight edges. It's like fluffy and cloudy, and I highly recommend it, doing it this way, especially because you don't get any fringing. You can get around it. Now if I even start pulling out of focus this way, it's still even more beautiful this way, to just keep pulling it out of focus when I have the EyeSet in. So anyway, I beat the drum of the DPEYESET all the time. It's been around for a long time, but in this setup in particular, with this light head, going back into party mode here, we don't have any fringing, and we have a super amount of control over our image and what it is that we can do with our drop-off with a projector, all right? And I'll get back more into the DPEYESET when I do that with the DP 2.2 right now. So this is the DP 1.2 with the full spectrum DLED7N-C color light. Let's take a moment here to go through that and take a look at it, because it's quite remarkable. The next modifier from Dedolight for this light is the DP 2.2 dedicated shutter blade projector. We're going to take a look at that now. Again, my light is in party mode, so it's going all over the place. I'm just trying to show you that we don't need to stay in one color space here. You can obviously use this light in one of the billions of colors that it's capable of doing, but right now I'm letting the color wheel kind of spin so that you can really get a sense of what edges look like when we're using something as precise as the DP 2.2. The dedicated shutter projector is a real workhorse, especially if you're in the tabletop world or you really want to get graphical with your light. If you need absolutely perfect lines down to a hairline of light with zero fringing, then this is arguably the best optical device to do that in lighting, especially on this scale. I'm going to put this projector in focus. I'm going to pull the lens into focus, and I have to choose between my shutter blades because of how precise the focusing plane is. They're stacked on top of each other, a pair at a time, and they're less than a half a millimeter away from one another, and I have to choose which line it is that I want to focus on. In this case, I'll do the vertical ones, and I'm going to come down into what I always show people, which is what's the smallest line that I can make with this projection system. Now, again, I'm going through the color wheel here just to show you that there's no fringing. It's a perfect, perfect shape. The structure is perfect, and there is no fringing. If I have to do a close-up on the smallest of objects and I want to use a billion colors to be creative as I want to with it, that I can do with this. All the way down to the smallest of spots, which you probably can't even see in the video. That just gives you an idea. Now, back to the EYESET. If I have a little space of light here that I want to create, a spot of color, and I want to keep that color in that space. I've tried frost, I've tried Hampshire papers, I've tried all of these things, and I haven't found one that does it quite the same way as the DPEYESET. So again, I'm beating the drum of the DPEYESET. All right, here's the number 1. I'm just disrupting the light in this space. I'm keeping it local and I'm just disrupting the edges so the drop off becomes much more graceful. So that's a number 1. That's a number 2. Spreads it more than the number 1. And this is the number 3, which is the most spread. Of course, now I can stack them on top of each other and I can really get into controlling that drop off as much as possible. All right, so here we're at 5600, and what I want to do is I want to show you what it looks like if we pull this out of focus again, because we're blending light with 6 channels of different colors, not a single white diode. And we want to see what the offset looks like when you start to pull it out of focus to make a shape that isn't in perfect resolution. And this looks pretty good, I have to say. I would expect a lot more fringing out of this. I see a little bit on the outside edges. So kudos to dedolight for really making something I didn't expect to see it in that quality. I thought that we would have some more fringing, and I've proven wrong. So they are doing something absolutely right in this regard. It looks really, really good. Let me bring it back here and then use the EYESET to see the comparison. The number 1, the number 2. It just looks more natural. The number 3. Yeah. So that's DPEYESET, the DP 2.2. Some of you out there may already own a DLED7 bicolor light or a monocolor light, and you've invested in a DPEYESET or 710 beam intensifier lens. Looks like this, okay? And we use these to increase the output of our beams by making a new spot from the flood position of the light. So this lens warps the light back into a very, very bright spot. After that, you can clean that light up because you have all that power coming out of the light head now without increasing, the power on the ballast side. You're still living in a 80 watt space here. You're going to be able to increase that spot and then use reflectors, Lightstream reflectors, in order to reimagine that light and blend it a little bit more. And I wasn't sure if this was going to work with this light because, again, you're going to see when I put this in here and I'm set at 5600 that it magnifies the diode and it magnifies the cob. And so now we're in full flood. We have a lot more output. I'd say we have probably 300 or 400% more output than we had in the 15-degree spot range. But reflectors tend to homogenize light. That's something that spreading reflectors do. So not a number 1 Lightstream reflector, but a number 2 Lightstream reflector, or a number 3 or a number 4, is going to blend that light and give you some really beautiful light back. It's one of the things that the reflectors does very well. You could give it some pretty dirty light, you know, diodes that would give you normally, raw diodes that would give you 2, 3, 4 shadows. You're going to get a single shadow back, which is really amazing off of these reflectors. And in this case, I am getting 5600 back, even though you're seeing a kaleidoscope go up there. I've tested it, I've looked at it spectrally. I'm getting 5600, and that's really cool. Now I want to go into party mode again on my app here, lighting effect, party mode. And if that looks pretty good here, then I can tell you that using this, and I've set it now at the various channels individually, I'm getting like upwards of 600–700% more output from red, blue, cyan, any of the single colors that you want to use, because they are actually showing up without any blending. But right here I'm blending a lot of stuff together, and it's looking pretty good on this side. Let's look at what that looks like here on the wall again, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about in terms of how much blending is going on, and you'll see how much work these diodes are doing in order to make party mode happen, which basically is just blending of lots of colors, potentially billions of them again. Now, would you want to use any of those individually at any given point? I'm going to pause it. Doesn't look like you would use it as a direct source. Let's pause it again here at blue, almost blue. You're seeing only blue diodes here. If I take this off and I spot it down, I'm probably getting 4 stops more of light. When I put the beam intensifier on, now watch. I'm going to start flooding and tightening it up. And now I feel like I still am at a place where I've got homogeneous, nice beam, and I'm tightening up and getting brighter. There's a point by which the structure of the diode starts to happen and you can see the pattern. That's not as usable as a direct source. However, here, it's not that bad and it's a lot brighter, but I digress. Here we go. Number 2 reflector, mostly blue. Yeah, the beam intensifier works on the color light. I'm pretty pleased about it. I think that you do need to get it in hand and try it out and test it on some of the things that you think you would use a lot, but I'm getting more intensity. It's a tighter spot. It's beautiful to work with, so it's worth a try. Whereas you may have heard that the beam intensifier might not work on this light, I think you can see where the balance is, where it can be useful, where you could use it. If you love reflecting light, absolutely. I think you can use it. I think it's great. And then there's a kind of fine, happy little space there where, you know, you're not going to go in full and tight and get the diode spread. You're going to find a little happy balance in between to get a nice tight spot, very saturated bright to use as a direct source. So I think the DPEYESET works pretty great. So there's one more, of course, to see, and that is a softbox. So a typical small dedolight softbox. I put a grid on this one because I just like using grids. I think it's great. There's also a baffle inside and the front diffuser, so we're really cutting light down a lot with this thing. That's something to keep in mind. You can take the inner baffle out, get a little bit more out of it. But that said, I'm just going to try and awkwardly get this on. Here we are. And stand in here, party mode. Yeah, it works great. So I should obviously see some softer shadows. The light source is much larger. It's more like a 1x1 panel, except it's better diffused. So I do recommend also the softbox. I think that it's just one of those things where if you need a quick little softbox up close to a subject to get some really nice, soft, really saturated full color out of it, it's a great addition to the modifiers to have that creative potential on you at all times. I think that the color light works really well with all of the dedolight modifiers. So with that, we've seen all of the important modifiers and how the DLED7N-C full spectrum color light works with these, and I am really happy to report that it is as good as you would hope for from a dedolight.